Hey, it's Ben. Welcome back to Oasis, Nuevas, Fuerzas. It's good to see you again. Today we have the first week in a video series that Amber Stark, one of our Oasis hosts, put out to try to explain how to take care of missionaries that you might know. In this week, she's going to give a basic overview of missions and what she's seen as great ways to take care of people. So stick around. I think you'll like it.
I think all of you know me. I'm Amber Stark, and I was raised as a missionary kid. I grew up in England and Canada, and then I've spent some time in the US, some time in Korea, and now I live in Slovakia. I work for Life Impact Ministries, which is an organization that specifically does missionary care. That's our goal, is to provide care for missionaries. We set up houses called Oasis, and these are places for missionaries to come and find rest and restoration. So I've been in Slovakia doing that for 10 years now. And so, yeah, so the purpose of what I'm doing here is to educate the everyday man, or the everyday church Joe, or whatever you want to call it, on missions, and just basically to give you an overview of how missions works, how missionary life works, so that you can better understand your missionaries, so that you can better care for them. Because we are the body of Christ, and we are called to care for each other. Whether we are called to that as a specific mission or not is not the important part. The important part is that we care for each other in any way that we can. So you can't care for people if you don't understand how to care for them. So the purpose of this is to help you to understand better how missions work and what your missionaries may be going through. So I have to say a disclaimer first. All this information I'm sharing is from life experience and from other people sharing with me their experiences as missionaries. Now, you can't generalize anything in the world, as you know. A lot of these are general statements. A lot of these will apply to most missionaries, but not all. So I recommend that you talk to your specific missionaries and see which things apply and which don't. Some of them pretty much apply unless it's an extreme situation. So just keep that in mind as we go through this information. So the first question people ask is, how do people become missionaries? Because we not just pop out of the earth, and you're not born a missionary. Usually it comes, the Lord calls you into ministry. And this can be through various things. People can recommend it to you, or you can hear it from the Lord. There's lots of different ways that you can be called by the Lord. And this can happen at various ages in life. So first, you're called by the Lord. Okay, this is not a human calling. This is calling by the Lord. And it can happen at any age and in any time. So once you've been called into ministry, usually involves going and finding a mission to work with, depending on what your specific call is. If you've been called to translation work, then you need to look for a mission that works with translation. If you've been called to work with children, you look for a mission that works with children. And so you look for a mission that works with your specific calling. Some people don't have a specific calling, as in they feel led to missions, but they don't have a specific area. And sometimes then you go on what we call vision trips. You go to a country or to a specific ministry, and you learn about it, and you see if this is where the Lord is calling you. That's usually how it works. Once you've been accepted to the mission, you do have to have training. Usually they require a certain amount of Bible school. Sometimes the mission has a specific training that you have to go through for their mission. So it depends on the mission. Then you have to raise support, which I'll talk about in a minute. And then you move to a new location, although some people end up working in the location they were already living in. It depends on the situation. So next point is support raising. Now, this is something that's very hard to understand for most people, because this is out of normal life for 90% of the population. Missionaries run on donations by individuals and churches who commit to give on a regular basis, whether that be yearly, monthly, bi-monthly, bi-yearly, whatever. In order to live and work in the ministry, they have to have support from individuals and churches because missions is your full-time job, and there isn't a mission agency that will just pay you. The money has to come from somewhere. So it comes from supporters. So we call them our support team or our partner team. We have different missions and different people have different terminology, but it all means the same. So it usually involves going to visit churches and individuals and telling them what you're doing and asking them to support you for however much they can. Now, this can be very difficult, obviously. Nobody likes talking about money except maybe accountants. I don't know. And so it's very hard to just bluntly ask, can you support me monthly? I've met a lot of missionaries who are not natural public speakers either, and they have a hard time speaking in front of a congregation or even speaking to a small group, and then especially about finances. So it can be very difficult, especially for new missionaries. Another problem for missionaries first going on the field is they don't have a bunch of stories to tell you because they haven't been there yet. They don't have examples and things. So it can be harder for newer missionaries just to convey their passion and what their ministry is because they don't have that experience yet. So the support covers all living expenses. It covers like our food, rent, utilities, clothing, insurance, health. Basically, our entire income comes through support. But it also covers ministry projects, ministry expenses, we call them. They're usually categorized separately in like our expense reports and in our support levels. So we raise a certain amount for each thing. The amount you have to raise depends a lot on where you're going because cost of living can be different in different places. It can depend on how many people are in your family. A family of 8 needs a lot more support than a family of 2. It can also depend on your ministry. If your ministry is going to need a lot of materials or a lot of legal issues, then you're going to need more finances to cover those things. So it's important to consider that just because one missionary who's going to this place asks for a certain amount and another missionary who's going to a different place asks for more, there's a reason for that. It's not a random allocation of funds. It's very carefully thought out. We all think out our budgets every year. They're redone. And a lot of missionaries don't have savings at all. We try to encourage missionaries to at least put maybe $50 in the bank every month to keep a savings because it's difficult. And it's good to have a backup. So there is, some people ask, do mission agencies take some of your funds? Yes, they do. Your mission agency takes a percentage. Ours takes 10%. That is to cover the administrative costs that are needed to handle my support and my legal issues. I can't accept people's checks and donations and write receipts and send them out. I just can't do that physically. It wouldn't be possible for me to have that much energy, but also legally I can't do it. So that portion goes to cover the costs of what needs doing that I can't do. So that's your administrative costs. So every missionary has a certain percentage of their support that goes to ministries, to the administrative support. So let's see. So raising support is not a one-time thing. You have to keep doing it because we lose support through people who lose jobs, or people who pass away, or they just decide to stop supporting you. So support can fluctuate a lot, even month by month. So sometimes you're way below budget. You will have a month where you're $1,000 below budget and you just have to do it. And then maybe you'll have a month where you've got 200 more than budget in the account. And so maybe that helps. So it just makes a different type of living situation. You may budget for a certain amount, but it may not come in. So it's just something to understand about how missionaries work in their finances, and that's why they ask for support. So next I talk about prayer. We also need prayer, and as we're raising our support team, we're also trying to raise a prayer team, because missionary life is a spiritual battle. I know we are all in a spiritual battle, whether we're in missions or not. But spiritual battles come even more to those who are on the field, because the devil doesn't want us doing what we're doing. And so prayer is absolutely essential. And so many missionaries try and work a special prayer team that they can contact with specific needs. Some people have what they call emergency prayer team, or whatever they want to call it. It's usually a group of approximately 10 people, sometimes more. And you have these people that you know will pray. Generally, we send out prayer letters, and some people pray, maybe brief prayers, maybe full prayers. We don't know, but those on our prayer team, we know they are going to pray and they're going to commit it to the Lord for us. So prayer teams are also essential in raising your support. So let me go on to missionary life. This is something that is difficult to understand without living it. It can vary by field, because there are as many ways to be in missions as there are people practically. There are people living in the bush in Africa who are living in mud huts and going out and ministering to people in the villages and helping with things. And there are people living in the city, in the middle of apartment blocks. So it really varies by place and what people do. There are so many different ways you can be in ministry. I'll just tell you some of the broader categories. Some people are in church planting. They're there either to build up an existing church or to start a new church. Usually their aim is to get the nationals running the church and then move out so that the nationals can run the church themselves. That's the church planting. Some people are in specific evangelism, reaching people for the Lord. That may be working with an existing church, or it may be working in a place where there are no churches. So those people are specifically trying to lead people to the Lord who have never heard or have never understood, possibly. There's also translation. I think you pretty much understand what translation is. Translating either the Bible or Christian works or radio stations into the local language so that it can be heard and understood in the heart language. There's also missionaries who work with what I would call social injustice, helping people get out of the sex trade, slavery, traditional practices that are bad. I had one missionary who worked with in Africa with tribes that mutilated young girls as part of their traditions, as part of their coming of age. And so her mission was to help with that and use that to share Christ. So there's a lot of different social injustices. There's orphans, there's criminals, working with criminals, slavery, just helping people in bad circumstances. So that's the social injustice type. Then there's administration. Those people who are in administration are just as needed, and they still have to raise support usually. For example, one of our Life Impact staff, Celeste, she used to work in England, and she would plan conferences and organize all the prayer letters and the contacts between people. And admin can involve so many different things. It's not a very glamorous job. Some people will say how many souls were saved for Christ, and some people have to say how many conferences they organized. It may not be glamorous, but it's just as necessary. And so those are also missionaries, even though sometimes it doesn't seem like it because they don't look like they're doing the traditional things for missionaries, but they still are. My brother-in-law was the accountant for a mission, and he did accounting, but he ran on support as well. So administration is still part of missions as well. And then lastly is missionary care, which is what we do at Life Impact. We care for the missionaries. There's some burnout centers for missionaries when they've been burnt out. There's counselors. There is teaching for missionary kids and stuff. So, and then there's places like us for missionaries to come and rest, all different kinds of things. So that is different categories of missions. So depending on the field, they may actually also need an extra job, an official job, especially if they work in a closed country. You can consider it their cover job, that they work with a local radio station or they help with an orphanage or something. So their official job in country is not missionary because it's not allowed in that country, which means that they have to commit their time to that job as well. So they're basically working two jobs. So that can be very difficult. And usually those jobs don't pay very much. So they still have to raise support. So day-to-day life for a missionary is a lot like what you do. It's just, it takes a lot more. When you're in a separate country, when you're in a different country from your own, just going to the grocery store can take twice to 3 times as long as it would back home. It's just a lot more stress on life. The things that you have to do day to day are different from what you have to do back home, and just adjusting to that can be a challenge. David was telling me how he had to learn that going to gas for his car, it took him like an hour to get gas for his car. Then he finally learned that you got a local to go for you, and they took you the car to a special place where you could get gas. But he didn't know that. It was a totally different cultural thing and not something you would have known. So just an example of how things can be different. We often use those opportunities like grocery shopping, taking kids to school, as an opportunity for witness and ministry. That's where a lot of missionaries make their contacts, is through our day-to-day lives, is meeting those people in the store and striking up a conversation, meeting the moms and dads at school and helping with whatever else we can do. And then it builds relationships, and then you can share Christ. So the day-to-day things we also do, the things you would expect that would be labeled as missionary things, like outreach ministries, handing out tracts, teaching Bible studies, setting up seminars and things like that. Then there's the prep that goes into those. That is not something that just happens. There is a lot of work in preparing those things. Then there's the paperwork, and often that can be a lot more complicated in different countries. They have a lot of papers, and they tell you you need this, and then you come in and they say, oh yeah, you also need this. Then you come back and they say, oh wait, you need this too, and this wasn't stamped properly, or there's no signature on this. So things like that can take a lot more work. And then missionaries are also working on keeping in touch with their supporters and with their churches and stuff. So that's just another load of correspondence. So that's more work. So that's a lot of the work that they do. They also do personal Bible study. It's not much to talk about, but if you are going to teach others about the Word of God, you better have it in your heart and you better be learning, because you can't constantly give without being fed. So that's something that we don't talk about, but a lot of time needs to be spent in study and learning. Some missionaries will take courses online or do special things like that to keep themselves deeply in the Word of God. So how is it different from you? Now, let me just say, I'm not judging people not in missions. Not everyone is called to missions. Everyone is called to what the Lord has called them to do. We need people in every walk of life. Okay, so when I say these things, I am not judging you or saying that missionaries have it harder than you necessarily. Maybe you do have a cushy job. Maybe you do have a perfect life, but I doubt it. Okay, but the missionaries, as I said, everything is more difficult in a different culture and a language. When you're communicating constantly in a different language, it drains your energy. It can be just as draining as physical energy. Learning languages can be just as draining. There's the emotional, spiritual stress of work also. You can be faced with very raw and difficult things. Depending on your situation, you can hear a lot of difficult things. You can see a lot of hard situations. You have to deal with them day to day. And this can be very emotionally and spiritually draining just by its very presence. People who live near the slums, in order to help them, they may not be doing it all the time, but it's still on their heart and in their sight all the time. And it's very difficult to get away from that kind of stress. They're working in a normal job, what I call normal job. You're working towards the company's growth or the financial growth, and that's very easy to measure. You usually have very attainable or specific goals that you can look at. It's very difficult when your ministry is your work is spiritual, because how do you measure spiritual growth? How do you measure what someone has learned something from the Lord? How do you measure that? Check it off a list, it just doesn't. So it's hard to often see your progress. But when you do see the progress, it's really incredible. But it's also hard to put your finger on and say, and give a number or something specific like that. So another thing is that there's no such thing as work hours for a missionary usually, unless you work in an admin office and you go there from 9 to 5. There's no such thing. When you're a missionary, you work when you need to work, whether that's at 9 o'clock at night or 5 o'clock in the morning or midnight. It's whenever things need to happen. A lot of missionaries, we have trouble with this at Life Impact, trying to teach missionaries to create space and stop. It's very easy to just keep going, especially when your work is in your home, because a lot of missionaries work from their homes and your work is in your home. And so, hey, I finished dinner and I'm free. Why don't I do some more paperwork? So it's a different mindset from leaving work and you're done for the day. You go home, you spend time with your family, you do your house things. It's a different mindset. It's I have to do this, so I do it whenever. So just so you understand that a lot of missionaries do that. So if they're working at a strange time, that's why. Also, as I said, your home is your ministry place. We had people come into our house at all hours of the night because we were in a friendship evangelism. So we'd have people coming over at 9 o'clock at night wanting to talk. And our house was just open. So, you never know when you're going to have to work. So it does make it more difficult to have like family time and space and rest. I remember my parents used to park the car somewhere else and close the curtains so nobody would know we were home, so we could have some family time. It worked most of the time. So mindset of working for a spiritual reason, working for kingdom work, as we might call it, is harder to say no. Much harder to say no. If your boss says, can you work an extra hour on Thursday, and your kid has a game, you can say no. If someone who is struggling and depressed and asks you to lead them in a Bible study or a prayer session on Thursday, it's a lot harder to say no to something like that. So that's one of the reasons missionaries will have a hard time saying no. So we have to practice that. Everybody say no. It's very good for you to learn how to say no. Back to the finances, because it's unreliable, it can make things difficult. Certain months will be fine, but there's also that tension of not knowing if the next paycheck will be enough, if I can buy my kids shoes this month, if the grocery bill is going to make it to the end of the month. Now, I'm not saying everyone struggles. Some people don't have problems with that. But most missionaries do struggle with finances. There's also no opportunity to get bonuses or work extra hours. If you work at your job, if you need extra money for whatever, perhaps you can get extra hours, or you'll get a bonus at the end of the year. There's no such thing in missions. You work, and you get the same amount because that's what you've budgeted. So it's just, if there's a special need, that's why you'll get missionary requests saying, we need a new car, we need, so-and-so needs a surgery, and we don't have the finances because there's no play in the budget and there's no opportunity to make extra money. Most missionaries like me, you're on a specific visa and you can't work at anything else as to what you do. So I couldn't even pick up a part-time job if I had time, which I don't, to supplement your income. Most people couldn't do that. So just to know that. So it's also hard being thousands of miles away from family, although I'll admit sometimes it can be good being that far away from family. But most of the time you miss your family, and you miss your home culture. So those are some of the difficulties. Not saying that missions is all difficulties. It's a lot of joy, and we love what we do. It's just totally different from what the average Joe does. And so I'm just trying to show how some of these differences can affect the way people would talk or the way they act. There's the joy of seeing people come to Christ, of seeing churches growing, of seeing orphans finding homes. There's so much joy in missions. So that's why we still stay. Despite everything, it's worth it. It's worth it. So lastly, I just want to say how you can help based on what I've said. The big thing is, like I said, understanding. Okay, you understand now. It will help you to be able to pray better, and to talk specifically to your missionaries in a way that might make them feel understood a bit more. Understand why finances are such a big deal, why missionaries are always talking about finances, because it's a big deal for them, and it has to be. And maybe you could bring up finances yourself so they don't have to bring it up, so they don't feel awkward. You can ask, how are your finances? What do you need? Even if you can't give, they appreciate you knowing and praying about it. So, also, there we go. There's, don't ask just about numbers. Missionaries don't often have numbers. Numbers are very difficult for us. I can tell you how many missionaries have come through my house, but I can't tell you the impact that has had on their lives and how they have changed or been blessed. Growing a church is not something that can be done by numbers. So instead of asking for something about numbers, like how many or how much, ask for a story. Like, what's the best thing that's happened this year? Or how is your church reaching out to the community? Or something more. Allow them to speak about what they're doing rather than expecting a specific number or something like that. Understand that they have a strange schedule. They work odd hours. So you might get replies to your emails 3 days later. You might get replies a week or two later. They might not be available at normal times to talk on the phone. You just be flexible with how their schedule works because it can be very strange for their schedule. Um, be aware that you won't understand everything. Sorry, but you just won't. Unless you've been in missions, you won't completely understand. But you really appreciate it when people try to and when they seek to understand. Even having an open heart makes a huge difference. So just be okay with not understanding things that they might say. Express interest in their family, not just the ministry. They have a lot more in their lives than just the ministry. And sometimes it can make them feel very, I don't know, isolated or put inside a box that you only want to hear about the ministry. When, as you know, your job is not who you are. A lot of who you are comes from your family as well. And so just talk to people about their families as well. Be open to talking about things other than the ministry. I'd ask you to I encourage you to encourage your missionaries just by sending a note or a card or a gift or maybe a Christian book that you've read that was really encouraging to you. After you finished it, send it to your missionary or buy them a copy and send it to them. Why not? You know, uh, and be okay if it takes them a while to get back to you and reply. Um, Sending a birthday card reminds them uh, that you think of them as a person and not just as a the mission. It's good to know that someone remembers your birthday. We have a lady who has sent me a birthday card as long as I can remember, and she still sends them, and that's her ministry. She sends them to a bunch of missionaries. I actually had a family come through my house and they saw my birthday card from her and they said, she sends us cards too. It was so great. So things like that can be so encouraging to people just to remember special dates for them. So pray for, as the Bible says, Paul asked people to pray for open doors, for spiritual growth, and for boldness. Those are 3 things you can pray for your missionaries. They need spiritual growth, they need boldness in sharing the word of God, and they need open doors. And also ask them for specific prayer requests for their family, even just for family things.